Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar. This is a joint webinar between OpenNTF and HCL's Digital Academy. Will be, it's for this month, it's part of our series, but it is for both of us, and we will be talking about Sametime 12 on Docker. It'll be a deployment walkthrough. So the agenda here, I have our usual introductory slides, and then I will be handing it off to our presenter, Tony Payne from HCL. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll wrap it up then. So I definitely want to thank our OpenNTF sponsors, and especially I guess HCL gets double thanks in this one. HCL has made a generous contribution for our organization that's been funding these webinars and we've done contests and supporting user groups and things like that. But then now also they're collaborating with us on some of these webinars directly, which is a delight. And we'd also like to, as always, thank Prominent, who donates all IT-related services. They handle a lot of hassle for us, and they are always up for dealing with the infrastructure of our Domino servers and Atlassian servers and whatnot. And they are very generous about this and very good, and they've been an excellent partner for years and years. And I'd like to mention that this is our community. So, as OpenNTF, as contributors, as users, as HCL customers, this is for all of us. So we welcome you to, in any way you can, get involved. All of us are volunteers, board members, people writing code. We're not generally paid for this. Sometimes it'll be an offshoot of our work, but it's really just stuff that we want to do because we want to see it done. No effort is too small. So, if you have just some small things, like there's the pull request on ODA earlier that actually I have to take a look at, but like that's a nice contribution. Anything, documentation, improving code, anything like that. If we welcome all contributions and all involvement. We all got started with something small at the start. And so, and if you have an idea that's bigger than you, we want to build projects, we want to build teams, and we want to get this stuff going. So if people have notions, we would love for you to join our Discord and chat about it and pitch ideas and collaborate. And we welcome all sorts of this kind of thing. And we do have a few updates about the board. So these are actually things that we have discussed a little bit recently. So one of them is that we have an ongoing user group presentation project. So the idea here is that, for decades now, there have been various user groups and official conferences and things like that, and it's difficult to find the presentation. So sometimes they'll be on SlideShare, sometimes they'll be on somebody's blog, sometimes they'll be on an old Lotusphere CD somewhere. But we would like to gather as many of these presentations as possible and that we legally can. So as long as you hold the copyright and distribution rights to a presentation, we would love for you to drop it into the our presentation project. We should probably update these slides to reference Discord. But anyway, in Discord or Slack temporarily for now, but eventually Discord, there's a presentation projects channel. You can get information there. There's a little app that Oliver put together where you can upload your presentations, and the more the better. The more of these we can have, because we would love to be a resource to find these things. So, when you say, wasn't there a thing about Domino Designer a couple years ago where you can add design elements, etc.? Like, it would be easier. We would love to be the place that you could go for that. And then beyond that, we did have, especially at our AGM recently, we talked about the future of NTF and how we're going to evolve OpenNTF. We do have some, I wouldn't say final, but we have some of our thoughts and things that that came out of our discussions among ourselves and with community members at Engage and etc. We will be posting blog and video about that soon, but obviously the future NTF is always in the future, so we welcome all feedback. Anytime anybody has any ideas or thoughts or concerns or wishes for OpenNTF, we are always welcome. We always welcome that. We love to hear it. And our next webinar, we don't have the topic quite yet. It is going to be August, which means that it's probably going to be kind of a light one. You know, we have a couple ideas there. When we do have it, you can watch openntf.org/webinars for more information. We will post about it. We'll send out invitation emails. So once we have that nailed down, you will know, and then that will be, you know, presumably around the same time in August. So keep an eye out for that. And during the presentation, so this is kind of a logistical thing for GoToWebinar, there is a question section in your little GoToWebinar panel. You can add your questions there, and then they'll show up for us as we go. And then, you know, any that are super time sensitive, we'll probably read during it. But in general, that will be the Q&A at the end for the kind of broader questions. And so that's the best place to put it. We'll also try to look at chat if it shows up in there, but the questions pane is the best place for it. And so that covers the logistics. And so now I will hand it over to Tony.
Thanks, Jesse. Let me show my screen and start my presentation a little bit here. So again, thanks, Jesse, and thanks to everyone that's joining us. I'm Tony Payne. I'm a senior Sametime developer slash architect slash support person. I've been with the Sametime team since its beginning back in '96, and I've helped many customers become successful with our product. The last webinar I did a few weeks back on just generally walking through a deep dive on Sametime deployment, we talked about the fact that there was going to be a HCL Academy course for deploying on Kubernetes that would take you from the beginning to the end on Kubernetes. And one of the questions that came back was, can we get a walkthrough on Docker? Docker is generally very easy as compared to Kubernetes to get up and running and deployed, but a lot of you are still unfamiliar with it, and we wanted to walk through it. So today's goal is just that. Let me get this. So today's goals is very simple. By the end of this next hour and a half, I hope to give you a good overview and understanding of the Sametime 12 topology and requirements that apply to both Kubernetes and Docker. Give you a quick overview of some of the migration requirements and configuration and troubleshooting. Now, a lot of those things will happen as I'm doing the deployment, because I'll be talking about it while we're waiting for a command to complete and things of that nature. But we'll also, because usually a Docker deployment usually only takes about 30 minutes, we got an hour, I'll go through some of the actual troubleshooting and some of the configuration steps that are in documentation so that you can see how they're done live. And of course, today's real goal is the Docker deployment itself, step by step. We're going to take a relatively new machine and install Mongo on it. We're going to configure Mongo. We're going to install Docker and the Docker Compose command line utilities, and then we're going to deploy Sametime Premium and show you how you verify different parts of it. And of course, along the way, we'll share the best practices, we'll share lessons learned, and of course, tips and tricks, and answer your questions as we can about different questions you might have around the deployments. Most of the slide deck that I've got here in front of me includes all the information from the previous webinar, but the first half dozen slides are tailored for today. So if you've got that presentation, there's not a lot new in this presentation, but what's new is the live portion of it that we're going to do. So I guess a couple of new things real quick that isn't in the old presentation is that we do have a new white paper that's just been published, which is kind of in essence what we're doing today. It's a walkthrough of deploying Sametime v12 on Docker. This white paper will take you through every step just like I'm going to. Different author, I did review it. It's a good article, and I don't know what else to say about that, but it gets you to the same goal. So if today's video doesn't answer all your questions, that white paper will. And of course, if you have questions after that, reach out to us through either the Sametime forum or through support channels as required. Also kind of a little bit of an early announcement, but not that early. Sametime 12 FP1, our first fix pack. We're hoping to ship that within the next very short time period here. Current ETA is possibly the end of this week. It does contain several important fixes that you'll want. A lot of them around upgrade environments, things that we weren't able to get into the shipping code prior to the gold release, but those will be there. For new installations, most of those don't necessarily count, but you do want to look for FP1 when it comes out here very soon. If you've already got an existing V12 deployment and you want to upgrade to FP1, it's as simple as pretty much repeating the same steps as the install, and that will be documented. But you unzip to the location and then run a couple of commands and your installation is upgraded. You do not have to uninstall and reinstall and all of that. Very, very simple. So let's talk a little bit about the deployment and what it means. What is same time versus same time premium? If you go up to the FlexNet and you'll hear us talk about it, those are basically the licensing models. Same time is our chat only or our limited use licensing model for the smaller environments that are only using the chat components. Same time premium, on the other hand, is the one that includes all those chat components and the meetings component. So just I mean, for me, they're synonymous, right? Whether you're using the limited use chat only or if you're using full with meetings, they're synonymous, but the packages are, of course, a little bit different. The installation steps, the configuration steps, the troubleshooting steps are all the same. Obviously, in a limited use or a chat only environment, you wouldn't be worried about meeting component troubleshooting or config, but you would be worrying about all the chat things. With Sametime 12, just to reiterate, we're now fully containerized. That means that you're no longer installing separate components like Domino and Sametime and single machine instances for a particular component. We are now on Docker, we are Kubernetes, which means that we are containerized deployments that can be moved around quite easily. We've eliminated some of our dependencies, specifically with Sametime Community. For those that have been around the product for years, know that we were always built on top of Domino or installed on top of Domino. And we've removed that dependency now, which makes us more lightweight. We don't need quite the number of resources that we did in the past, and the installations are simpler. You don't have to deal with Domino dependencies. You don't have to worry about what level of fix packs on Dominoes, how do I handle things like upgrades or fix packs on Domino in addition to the same time fix packs. It's all much simpler, and that was the goal of it. If you're currently using the Domino native directory for your deployment, for your directory structure, you would have to convert your infrastructure to using that as an LDAP source. So we still support Domino directory, you just access it through LDAP. And then on down this slide here, I've got a few slides on topologies. I'm just going to cover one real quickly, and then we're going to get straight into the deployment. And as we do the deployment, we'll talk about the configuration. And then as we get done, we'll talk about migrating. Now, in this slide deck, again, all of the information around that is still there. So even if we don't cover it today, the slide deck includes it. So a couple of other thoughts as we get started here. Persistent chat is now required. So for version 11, we introduced persistent chat, and persistent chat for us is not just about persisting it in a database for access and with other tools or for compliance type reasons, but we do persistence in that your conversations follow you as you jump from client to client. Typical case would be like myself. I'm working at my desktop all day. I need to run an errand and go to lunch or go to the store for some reason. I log in then via my mobile device. All my conversations that I've had that day are available immediately to me on my mobile device, so I can pick up right where I left off. If I come back to my desktop and log back into the desktop, all the conversations that I had on my mobile device are picked up and are on my desktop. So I never lose context for where my conversations have gone and I have all that history available to me on any particular conversation I want to know. With version 11, we allowed you to disable that because not everybody was ready for that. With version 12, we now made it required. There's a couple of reasons. One, now we require Mongo for more than just that persistence storage space. We use Mongo, our database access, for our meeting storage and several other functions. So since you have to have Mongo anyway, might as well use it for that persistence layer. The benefit to that is also you no longer have to worry about differences in client behaviors if you've disabled persistence. And that was a generator of some problem reports with older versions of clients and new versions of clients with persistence disabled. Sometimes things just didn't all line up the way we wanted them to. So now by requiring persistence, again, we've simplified the way these clients work together and the way the servers work together. If you don't want the persistence, and when I put the quote there around the word persistence, the long-term nature of it, by default, we store that chat data for up to 90 days. You can set that time to live to 1 day, which pretty much mimics exactly what happens in your client now, in that any given day's history is available to you when you have when you start a conversation. It kind of rolls. So 1 day of persistence in the database just means that that persistence does not last long term. So in the database, stored chat history is limited to whatever you set that time to live to be. I put a line here that says the difference in installation between Sametime and Sametime Premium. The overall installation aspect of it is exactly the same. You're installing Docker or a Kubernetes environment. You're going to run a script depending upon which environment that is. And that's it. It's exactly the same. What's different would be which components are laid down. In a Sametime or chat only environment, you're only going to get the community server, what we call the Sametime MUX, the proxy server, and a couple of components that help with authentication and things like that. In a premium environment, you also get the video components, the recorder components, and a few other bits that help with the meetings aspect of it, and of course the small parts that tie all of them together. But the installation itself is fundamentally the same. And then we talk a little bit about upgrade options here. So coming from a version 11 environment to a version 12 environment, we can't upgrade your community server in place because it's now containerized, which means that you'll have to install those particular components. If you've already got Sametime Premium in version 11.6 and you want to add version 12, you'll be upgrading your Docker or Kubernetes environment, and the new components will automatically be there. So what'll happen is that it's kind of like a side-by-side upgrade, and then you will shut down the old components once you've got DNS made to it. So again, just to reiterate that, when you're upgrading from 11.6 to 12, community will move to the new Docker environment or new Kubernetes environment, and your old community services will shut down. If you already have meetings, you can upgrade that kind of what I want to use air quotes that you can't see in place in Docker or Kubernetes. Just keep in mind that suddenly now you're going to have extra components there that will duplicate the old standalone components. And it's that simple. I mean, it really is. It's not difficult to do the upgrades. So real quickly, a topology here. That's a basic chat only internal deployment. And whether it was Docker, Docker in this case, it's a single host in the middle that includes your chat components that your rich clients can connect to, your browser clients can connect to, and it has two back-end connections, one to LDAP and one to MongoDB. Now, from a Mongo perspective, you could put Mongo on the same box if it has enough, if your box has sufficient resources, but usually we always have Mongo outside. And it's called a best practice, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. You want Mongo to be separate so that it can be managed separately. And in case you have a hardware failure, you can deal with it. A lot of customers that required redundancy and failover will actually have a Mongo cluster in this particular location. So it's just easier to point to it as a separate required prerequisite for our environment. If I wanted to open this up to the internet or to the public zone, which is where your mobile clients will likely come in from, or your web clients, people working from home, then all I have to do is allow those client connections to come over the firewall back to the same box. It doesn't require any changes of configuration to the box to allow that, or to the host to allow that, other than the firewall settings to allow them to come through. And you'll see that we're using our standard ports. 443 for browser clients. Everything is secure here. Everything is TLS 1.2 out of the box, and with certificates. 1533 has been our standard port for what we call the installed client. The rich client, as it were, is just the installed clients. And then we have, which I didn't talk about a moment ago because it was blocked by my little GoToWebinar thing. We have one outbound connection for mobile clients from the server, and that's to the APNS and Google Cloud Messaging, and that's for push notifications. But from a public to adding Sametime to the public zone is really just a matter of opening up the appropriate ports and having the server hosted in a network location such that that can happen. And adding meetings is not difficult at all. In fact, you'll notice that it is the exact same overall topology. The only thing we've added is port 10,000 for Docker or 30,000 for Kubernetes for the UDP, for the media streams themselves to the clients. All media streams, all the meetings are always happening in browser clients or mobile clients. That's why you only see that port opening up here. We do have by default a connection outbound to Stun, which we can talk about more in a minute. But Stun allows the server to discover the address as it might be seen by public clients. And that helps negotiate those media streams. And again, we have the same two backend connections, one to LDAP and one to Mongo. But adding premium services, adding meetings is not difficult. If any of you have been around since Sametime 9, you knew that installing Sametime with meetings and media streams was a multi-box, multi-week, multi-month sometimes endeavor to get all of these different pieces set up. With Sametime 12 being fully containerized, the workshop for Kubernetes, installing a complete Kubernetes on-premise 4-node cluster, took about 3 hours. Installing Sametime today, which we're going to go through, takes about 30 minutes on Docker, and that's from start. I didn't do anything special here. That's what I want to jump into. But that's the quick overview of some topologies. The last topology would be if you're internal only, and the difference is that you create your own Stun service on the inside so that the server can detect its address. And there's a couple of other ways we can do that in Docker as well. But we can also fully support a fully internal environment if that's the way you need it. Most today, you have a mix of internal clients and public clients. And so the public zone is usually where people deploy this. So just to reiterate here real quickly, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on slides, I definitely want to get into the live part of this presentation today. The network considerations, because by far the primary ticket issue, say this the right way, the primary driver of problems is the network. You get Sametime deployed, your clients can't connect, or the media doesn't quite work right for meetings. 90% of the time, the reason for that is going to be a network firewall at some point not being cooperative. So the installed and embedded clients use 1533 for community services. That is your chat and awareness components. Web clients use 443 HTTPS to access the chat, mobile, and meeting services. So you have to make sure those are open. Those are usually the easy to. The hard one here is the clients using the UDP ports for 30,000 or 10,000, depending upon your environment, for the media streams. By default, direct access to the video node is required. This is usually more of a Kubernetes statement. In Kubernetes, you have several different nodes that will run these pods, and we have one that we specify as the video node, or nodes. There may be more than one. In Docker, you only have the one host, so you have to know how that host is going to resolve to your external audience or even to your internal audience. And we do that, we determine that again, as I mentioned a moment ago, through the use of stun. Stun is basically a what is my IP address for audio video streams. You reach out and it returns to you the address as it saw that request come from. And if your stun server is on the external side, like our default, the ones we use by default, the Google stun, then you will get a public IP. If you set up a stun server on the inside of the network and use it, then it will return the IP address as seen from that particular network segment. And then finally, so that's all about getting the right IP address. Sometimes you have a case where you need to traverse firewalls and you can't do that directly. You have to use a relay. We do support using turn for that. And then these two slides, again, I'm assuming these slides were provided to you. There's just information here because I want to get into the actual deployment part of it. But that's what turn is for. So let's get straight into the installation. Apologize a little bit for jumping past those last two screens on stun and turn. The information is out there, and I'll be happy to answer more specific questions at the end of the call if we need to on that. So an overall installation summary: know your LDAP environment. Those that have been around Sametime for years know we make good use of LDAP. You have to know it ahead of time. If you're coming from a Domino directory environment or a native Domino directory, go ahead and get LDAP running on one of your Domino servers so that we can access it. Make sure you understand the layout of it and that it's accessible from your server. Then the next step is to install and configure Mongo. The step that I didn't write down here was install Docker and Docker Compose. And then we will install Sametime or Sametime Premium. Today we'll be installing Sametime Premium. So with that, let me get my screen set up here and we will go straight into the installation. One key thing here that I want to make sure everybody sees is that I am going to be following verbatim, unless I find a typo in it, our documentation for this. I'm not going to be pulling any magic tricks. I'm not going to pull any rabbits out of a hat. I'm not going to do anything that I can think of that is not already documented. So just keep that in mind. So over here on the, let me get a drink of water. Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I have no idea what just happened. My laptop decided to shut down. Let me give myself just a second to get my my remote sessions reset up here. One moment, please, and my apologies. We'll call that Murphy.
There's been a little panic in the room. Everyone was asking questions. Now we know the answer. By the way, Tony, there are a couple of questions you may want to add later at the end of the presentation.
All right. Almost there. One moment, folks. My apologies again.
To everyone, I see lots of questions. What's happening? There are a bit of issues with Tony PC, so he's going to fix it and we'll resume the transmission as soon as possible. It's not only you that see that the screen is not changing and nothing is working. Just wait, please.
All right. Okay. Let's see. I'm now re-sharing my screen again. Do we see the new screen now? I mean, it looks a lot like the old screen, but I'm hoping it's live. I'll launch this. And did we see the change now? Is everything back in order?
Yes.
Okay. All right, very good. So again, my apologies for that brief interruption. And again, just to reiterate, I'm going to walk through installing Sametime Premium on Docker. I am going to be following the documentation verbatim. I'm not going to be doing anything that that isn't part of the documentation. Other than getting my dogs out of the room. So on my left-hand screen here, we have a remote desktop, and that's not important for you. It's simply that the particular machine I'm getting to requires me to go through a jump box. But I'll be opening up a PuTTY session to my Linux box. Can everybody see that font in that window okay? Does that look pretty good for the most part? I'll assume yes. So the very first step here we're going to do is install MongoDB. And in this case, we include some instructions for installing it on Windows. Again, MongoDB is a prerequisite. Other than making sure you have the correct version, which for V12 is 4.4, and we do support 4.2, and there's been some testing with 5.0 without any issues on that. But we start off with 4.4 for our default instructions. So it's a separate box to us. It can be anywhere in your environment as long as it's accessible, and you just get it set up per your requirements. In this case, I'm going to install it on Linux because I'm going to use the local MongoDB to the server that I'm installing just for the ease of the deployment, just to make this very simple and to show you how to install MongoDB. So a big helpful tip on Linux environments is that most things require elevated access. So you either can type everything, preface every command with the word sudo, assuming your account has those privileges, or you can go ahead and switch to a root account that does have the privilege, so you don't have to worry about typing the word sudo. Again, for the ease of this environment, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my root user so that I don't have to worry about typing sudo. A common mistake is that you'll type sudo for 3 out of 4 commands, and then you'll forget to type it one time, and then that command will fail and you'll wonder why. So the first thing we're going to do is create what we call a repository file for Yum. This is CentOS 7.9, I think, and that requires, we're going to use Yum to install Mongo. You can go to the MongoDB documentation and find all kinds of instructions for various operating systems and ways to do it without Yum if you choose to. We're going to use Yum. So the first thing we do to get our focus on the right screen is we're going to create this repository. Let's see if I can get this to where they cooperate a little bit better. Now you can copy and paste the command straight from the documentation. The thing to watch for is that sometimes things don't copy and paste as well as we want to. So we always want to visually verify that things came through. One of the things I've hit in the past when copying and pasting from PDF documents is things like this little hyphen sign right in the middle of this URL may not copy, or the line breaks may not be correct. But if you do a visual check and things look good, then you can save the file. Another handy trick is that when I'm doing those types of copy and paste, if I don't trust it to be copied correctly, is I copy and paste it to a notepad or to TextPad++, which removes any type of formatting to it before I paste it into my putty screen here. And now that we have that created, we will run our install command, which is as simple as yum install Mongo. Typos are important. It will do its work. And once it's there, once it asks you if you confirm it or not, you hit a yes and hit enter, and MongoDB will install. It will pull down any other prerequisite packages and make any other updates that the MongoDB requires. We specified in our script while that's running that we wanted MongoDB 4.4, so that is the version we got. MongoDB has been installed. The way we would confirm that is that we would start and stop the service. So there's some other confirmation steps you can take here, but we'll just do a service MongoD start. And if you wanted to stop it, you could run the stop command. If you wanted to set the status, you can run the system control status command, and you'll see that it's running. So now, Mongo's installed. That took, what, about a minute? And I was talking and typoing the entire time. So now we will start to think about configuring it. And the first thing we'll do is make sure that Mongo is started, which we just started it on the Linux side here. And then we will access the Mongo shell by typing the word Mongo. And you can see that I got into Mongo. We are in the Mongo shell. So now we will start typing our commands. And I already see a typo here that I need to get corrected in doc. It's not user admin, it is use admin. In Mongo database, when you want to access a database, it's use database. So in this case, we're switching to the database admin so that we can create our user. And again, in this case, I am going to copy the command straight from the book here. Most customers will likely change the password to something a little more challenging. Make sure you get to all the way to the end of the screen. MongoDB uses a JSON structure for its arrays and data. So you want to make sure that when you're copying and pasting a command such as this, that you get all of those brackets at the end, or you may not have everything you want. But what we're going to do here is create our user. We're going to create a user called Sametime user with a password of Sametime with the following roles. Roles read write to our chat logging database, to a mobile offline database, to the meeting database. We're also going to give the user admin any database so that as code starts up, that user has permissions to do more things in the data without having to ask for special conditions. So we'll hit our enter key, we'll come back, that it successfully added the user. Now we will manually create the chat logging database and two of the collections. So to create a database is as simple as typing the word use chat logging, and then we will insert our initial records to the collections to create those. Most other databases that Sametime uses are created automatically by the code. This one is not. If you are using if you're coming from an 11.6 environment without meetings and you're wanting to add version 12 with meetings, you will have to create one role manually, and that is for the meetings database. And there is a command for that. I think it is still in the 11.6 documentation, but if you run into that, just let us know. But again, you'll see we created these commands. It came back with the acknowledged. And then we now we will exit the Mongo screen. We will stop the service. And then we will edit the MongoDB configuration file so that we can set the replica set name. Now, the nice thing about Mongo replica sets is that if you have multiple MongoDB nodes or multiple MongoDB servers, they can connect up and give you replication and failover, and everything is automatic for you. For our case here, and what we're setting up is a single node replica set because we take advantage of some of that replica set features, even if we don't have multiple servers under it. So now we will switch to the Etsy folder, and then we will vi mongodb.conf, and we will come down here. Oh, here's a quick note here too. The bind IP, if you are coming in, everything's going to be on local hosts on one machine. You don't need to change anything. Most of the time, if you're using a separate server or you're going to use a host name to access this, you want to change this to 0.0.0.0.0 or using the bind IP all setting. The easy setting here is just to switch this to 0.0.0.0 like that. And we will get rid of the rest of the comments just to make sure there's no extra config setting in here that would make it upset. And that way what happens is that Mongo will bind to all IP addresses and access to it not only on 127.0.1, but maybe off the true IP of the machine, 192, 168, whatever, would also work. Without that, they would be refused. They would only accept off of the other. So for replication, we uncomment that line and we add insert 2 spaces REPL set name, case is important, space RS0. That is just the default replica set name that we will use in our code. And then that is all it takes to enable replica configuration. We save that, and then we restart. It will come back up. We go back into our shell, and why did that not? Oh, because I haven't typed the next command. Remember, I said I'm not going to do anything that's not in the doc. So the next step is when you come back into the Mongo screen here, you have to initiate the replica set. And as simple as typing rs.initiate. And now you'll see that it has rs0 secondary. If you hit enter, it'll come back to rs0 primary. Congratulations, you have now successfully set up, installed, and configured MongoDB for same-time usage. There are no other steps required, but let me give you a couple of other quick tips here, especially where it comes around the replica set itself. When you are connecting to MongoDB, and let's say I use an IP address of, where I just use this local host name, st-whatever-company.com. MongoD, when it's set up in a replica set, will automatically redirect you to what it thinks is the current primary of the replica set. In a single node, that should be back to yourself, but it will redirect you based on how it knows itself, not on how you may think it may be. This is especially true in a Linux environment where the host name might not be found in DNS the way you normally think. So by typing rs.conf with the open and close parentheses, I can see the replica set configuration, and I can check that its host is this address. And that's actually the host name. If I were to type host name at the Linux prompt, that's what's added there. So two things to keep in mind. One is that when I'm configuring my same-time server here in a moment to connect to Mongo, make sure that the rs.conf address is also in DNS. This one actually will be, because this is the local host name of the machine, and on the machine it will resolve. If it were like localhost or 127.0.0.1 or something else like that, then we might have to fix it. There is documentation out there on how to do that. I remember writing a tech note for it quite some time ago because it was a fairly common problem, but it seems to be getting better these days with 4.4, that it's more likely to be accurate than not. But keep that in mind. If that fits the way you want, then you are done. MongoDB is now set up. So if I type hostname here, I think it's -a. Nope. You can see that the host name is what was in the replica set configuration. And if I do a ping of that address, then I can see that it resolves as I expect it to. So I know now that my MongoDB configuration will work if I use that host name in my config for Mongo when it's prompted for from the same time side, or when I or if I just use that, or if I use an alias and MongoDB redirects me. When you have multiple clusters or multiple cluster members in a MongoDB replica set, you remember that any of the members could be the one that you're sent to. So you have to make sure that all of those addresses are correct. All right, so now we're ready to start installing Docker. So now we're going to come down here. We've done Mongo, install Sametime. We're going to click the install Sametime in a Docker environment. And our very first step is, of course, installing Docker. Red Hat has a tendency to have older versions of Docker on it, depending upon which release you use. CentOS, the same thing. So usually what we recommend, and the easiest way to do this, we kind of copied some steps in for CentOS, but you can also go to the Docker site itself and get the correct instructions for your operating system. The first step we usually do is we like to remove anything that has already been installed just to make sure that we're getting the latest. So I will quickly run a yum remove Docker. And I'm just going to start with that. You could type in all of these others too, but if Docker, the main Docker isn't there, the rest of them likely won't be either. And in fact, I had already used Docker remove once before on this machine, so I knew they weren't going to be there. But this is usually what we want to see. If you happen to remove some stuff, that's fine, because you're going to get ready to install the Docker version we expect to have here. So the first thing we do is we install the utils. The -y on a yum command basically just says go ahead and say yes at the end of it. Depending upon your level of comfort, you can do the -y or you can leave it off and then manually say yes or no. If you're telling it to install, unless you have a really good reason, you're almost always going to say yes at the end. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a repo to the config manager of yum for the Docker CE repo. And that basically tells yum where to find the packages we want when we tell it to install Docker. Now, you can copy and paste this. These backslashes should make these one line when you install. I've had a few times where copying and pasting this from the doc and from other places where it doesn't. That's why I typed it manually. Just make sure this becomes one line. This is a case where copying it into Notepad and pasting it back over from Notepad is probably helpful. But we're going to do that step. You'll see that the answer to that is it's saved a repo to Docker CE. You're telling it to grab the file you want from this location. You could then VI or cat that file if you want to verify what was in it. Our next step is to install Docker. Here again, instead of typing, I'm going to copy and paste because this is an easy one line. When you're using yum, you can install multiple things on a command. You don't have to do them one at a time. Space between the packages you want to install. That comes in real handy when you're installing utilities like zip and unzip. You can do yum install zip, unzip, and they'll get them both at one shot. So we'll sit there and let that run for a second. And take a drink of water. And we're done. Docker has been installed. Now, the way we will start it and a validation of it is as simple as typing the right words and running it. You'll see Docker went and done it, and it said hello from Docker. That's validation that Docker itself has been installed properly and is able to run. It's able to retrieve packages. It's able to do its job. Now we will install Docker Compose. This step, if you're using an existing Docker system or an older one that you've tested with, make sure you get the latest Docker Compose 129 or later. There were some changes between 11.6 and 12 where we want to make sure that you have the latest. Might have been between 11.6 and 11.6 Fixpack 1, but just make sure you get the latest here. This command will copy down from that site the Docker Compose command and place it in the user/local bin folder. The common problem is that that file doesn't have the correct permissions on it. So if I were to type Docker Compose right now, it'd say command not find or permission denied. So we need to change the permissions on that file. You can copy it straight from here. This is a change mod. and we're adding executable permissions to that file. Now, if I type docker compose and I do -- version, just to get the version command from it, or the version entry from it, you'll, whoops, helps if I type it correctly. It'll come back and will tell me the version of it. And you'll see that it is 129 as we specified in the download command. And if we type docker, whoops, we can type Docker version and get the same information from Docker. Again, this tells you that everything is working very well and that it's all started. And congratulations, in what I think that was 5 minutes, we've installed Docker and Docker Compose. Now we're ready to install Sametime. So in my folders, I have already, the one thing I did ahead of time is I went ahead and brought down the installation. Now, what did I do? Oh. And there's my Sametime premium zip. So I want to unzip this. Now you can unzip this anywhere on the Linux machine you want to. I could unzip it here and I could run my commands and everything will work just fine. The thing to keep in mind is that when you're running from Docker and you're using the Docker Compose, you run all of your commands relative to a file called dockercompose.yaml. That's the file that tells Docker what components to load, any environment variables to pass to it, what configurations to use. And so it's important to keep that in mind. A lot of customers will put this in an opt folder. A lot of Linux admins prefer things to be over an opt, or they might have their own place they want to put it. So in this case, I created a folder called HCL. I will unzip my sametime_premium.zip to that location to opt HCL. So unzip, that's sametime premium.zip -d opt HCL, and it will then unzip those files there. It takes it a moment. This is a relatively large tar file that it has to copy over. So it does take a moment. Don't panic. It will eventually finish. Now, if we go to our opt HCL folder, we will see that we have all of our files here. The package itself works for both Kubernetes and Docker. There is no difference in the package and the zip file you download. It's just a difference in the method to install. So that's why you see things like a Kubernetes folder and a Helm folder. Those are things that will be used if you're going to install this in Kubernetes. Since we're installing it in Docker, we don't need to worry about those. We'll just leave them alone. As I said a moment ago, you run all your commands relative to your Docker Compose YAML file because that's how Docker Compose knows how to do its work with Docker. And in the case of, I need to get a host address here real quickly. In the case of Docker, we're going to run the install.sh script. Let me reach out over to a file. So this machine had a previous install. Quite a few actually. And I just want to get something out of a file here so that I have my host names that I want to use. This is not something you would normally do, but it does show that you could actually run multiples of these or have several of these installed on the system and then decide which ones you want to run based on where you run your start commands. And all I want to do here is get a host name. Could have done this a little easier. I'm going to copy that out to a notepad on my desktop. So just for information, that extra host command is something you use in Docker, and it's something you add to Docker Compose YAML, and we'll do this live here in just a moment. When I need to tell it an address and a host and a IP address that may not resolve in regular DNS. So this is how you add a host file entry into a container. Let me go back. But I wanted out of that, I wanted this STPin1, because that's the host name of my LDAP server. And this server itself is known by STPin2. So now, back to where we were, I will run install.sh, and the fully qualified Sametime server name, that is this machine. And the arrow keys do not work here. So let me do this, because I don't want to typo my host name. So that is the machine and the add host name that this machine is going to be known by clients. The domain name is everything after the first dot. That is where my cookies will be scoped to. The Mongo host is this machine as well. So I'll go ahead and put STPin2 in here. The Mongo port is the default, 27017. The Mongo admin username is Sametime user. Capitalization is critical. Usernames for Mongo are case sensitive. So if you just type Sametime under with a lowercase u there, you would have failed authentication to Mongo. Our super secret Sametime password that we used, and then it tells you that the connection URL will be. Now, of course, it asterisks out the password. You'll check that in case you know you need to do something different. But it's a good thing to just validate. And we do not want to override this, so we'll type no. The LDAP server host name is STPin1. So I will put that in. In this case, we're not going to use LDAP or TLS to access LDAP. We could do that later if we need to. We could do it now. The one best practice, I always start unsecure to LDAP if I can, because it gets things up and running before I add in the complexity of adding in certificate managers and stores and all of that to it. The default LDAP port 389. Do we need to configure advanced LDAP settings? Now, the advanced LDAP settings are things like if you want to need a bind account to access LDAP by default, if it doesn't allow anonymous binds, if I need to modify my LDAP search filters, and I know that in advance. If we're going against Domino LDAP, which actually in this case, we're going against OpenLDAP, but if you're going against Domino LDAP, you can just choose the defaults and move on. Since we know that in this case, we need to add additional settings, if we know we need to add additional settings, we would hit yes here, and then we would add them. Now, I'll have to add those manually here in a moment because I didn't get them yet for this environment. And now, so the next is to enter the base64 encoded JWT secret from an existing Sametime deployment. If you already have an environment and you want to keep all your tokens the same, you would just reuse that. If you just hit enter here, it will create a new one. Turn server address is if you are enabling Turn and you know you have one and it's set up and ready to go, you would give it an address here and we would add that to our configuration so that we could start using Turn as a relay right off the bat. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're not doing that. And if we want to add TCP support for our media streams over 4443, we can do that now, or we can do it later. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're not going to do that. It's a simple config change. It's not a big deal, but you do have to make sure the port's open for this non-standard port. We're also not going to configure LTPA right now. Again, I don't have a set of LTPA keys handy, but you can configure LTPA, like if you're going to coexist with an existing iNotes environment or an existing connections environment or whatever other servers you want to have provide authentication for your users to this deployment. You just have to have your LTPA keys in advance, or you'll have to sync on some new ones. So after answering the half dozen questions here, it will then load the images. Now, again, this takes a few moments because the tar file is, I think it's about 2 gigs. It takes a moment for the machine to process that.
While that's processing, we did have one question that just came in about where is the LDAP server deployed? Is it presumably on a nearby Domino server or otherwise?
In this particular case, the LDAP server is on a second box in this environment. This box is called st-pin2. It's a testing box. The LDAP server is deployed on st-pin1. It's just another box. And in this case, it's actually an open LDAP server. It's not a Domino LDAP, but which is why I said I had to probably reconfigure a couple of things to add in the base DN. That's important here.
Thank you.
But once it gets done reading that tar file, you'll see it loads all of these images. And these are loading it to the local Docker repository. It's not, there's all kinds of fancy things you can do with Docker, but in this case, we're simply loading these images to the local Docker repository. And it takes a minute, and you see all kinds of little numbers change. It's quite fascinating the first time you do it. Not really, but it's doing its job.
I'm allowed a shameless plug. On my blog, there's an article that explains all the LTPA stuff if you want to integrate with iNote servers. Basically, Tony basically helped me writing it. So if you can find it on Collaboration Today, you can be able to integrate with other systems like there's iNotes using LTPA. There's another question, Tony. There are no difference in the installation package between Sametime Limited and Sametime Premium.
At the same time, Limited has far fewer images to load. That's the only real difference. And especially with FP1, there are a couple other minor differences that were causing some documentation headaches, but those are fixed with FP1. But it's basically you just have far fewer images to deal with because you wouldn't have a catalog component to talk to meetings. You wouldn't have a recordings component for recording meetings. You wouldn't have a Jibri or for running the meetings on, things like that, or JVB. So it's basically just the limited version doesn't have any of the meetings components or any of the things required around it. Now, what you'll see here is that it created, once it got done loading the images, it generated whatever secrets it needed. In this case, it was the JWT secret for authentication. Started the composition, which created a couple of networks, which are based in the Docker Compose YAML file. It created some volumes, which is basically a local file storage place for things like recordings, some other pieces of information, and then it started the services. So right now, we have completed the install. Now, we're not necessarily done. I already know based on this environment that I've got a couple of manual steps to do, but we have just completed installing Sametime. Now, if I remember correctly, I was out of this for about 5 minutes. I spent a good half an hour talking about details, and it's 25 minutes past when my machine went down. And we've got a Sametime environment installed. Now, we might have a few things to do. How would we find how things are looking? One, if we wanted to verify what images were deployed to Docker, we can type a Docker images command. That will show me everything that was created, everything that Docker knows, and all of the components. Image ID is not something you necessarily need to worry about. What is critical in this, and especially helpful if you've got multiple versions installed, let's say you've upgraded this or you've installed FP1, you'd want to see that these image tags is how we determine very quickly what version you're running. So this image tag is 2022 0422. I know that is version 12 gold. And that tells me that everything that I'm using here is the same build. There's ways, again, Docker is very fancy. We could patch something and you might have a different version in here. That's how we would know that that was the case. In this case, this is all gold. If I do a Docker PS, it will tell me what all is running and what ports they're listening to. Now, it's kind of hard to get this screen big enough so it lines up good. That's a little bit better. But I could tell that, meetings is running, it's all been up about 2 minutes, and I can tell what ports are being exposed and used. And, it just gives me some good ideas. It gives me some information. Now, this was started automatically for me by Docker Compose. Docker Compose is how I start and stop my services. So if I want to Docker Compose down, it will stop all of the services and tear down that network and take some things offline, take it all offline. That's all based on things that are in Docker Compose.yaml. And then once that's done, there you go. You'll see it remove the network. The thing to remember, especially if you're coming from Sametime 11.6, is that you could stop your community server and then go get all your, and then you would go get all your trace files for a support ticket or to go review something. In Docker, in a containerized world, there's no persistence of those logs. So they are lost when you do a Docker Compose down. So it's very important that you would grab any logs or any data you want while it's up and running. So let me do a Docker Compose up-d. Now that command will restart everything. And then my next step might be to see, so we're now kind of getting into the world of the installation is done. I want to see if things are going to work the way I expect them to work. From a community standpoint, everything we want to look at on average will be in the community image. So if I wanted to get the logs from it, so it's Docker Compose logs, then the image name, HCL _ community _ 1, and then that will just print out the logs all the way to the endpoint. If I do a logs -f, that is similar to a tail command where you're going to see everything to the end, and then it's going to follow the logs as they're printed. What did I do wrong here? Okay, so when you're getting your logs, you attach to the image, to the name of the service, which in this case is community. But this is how I would get what used to be referred to as just about everything that was in the trace folder or the sametime.log. And we can see already that I've got an error attaching to STPIN2. Did I put in the wrong? Okay, so basically, following my community log, I already see that I have a MongoDB connection problem. Now, I expected this. I expected it for LDAP. I didn't really think about that STPIN2 wasn't going to resolve, but an error like that would tell me I need to add an extra host address. So if I were trying to log into community, I would likely fail because I can't get to Mongo. And that is why we look at logs. So how would I solve that? I'm going to copy the lines from here, from my old file, so that I don't have to worry about my typing. Anytime you, I'm going to Docker compose down. Anytime you edit or modify docker compose.yaml, or any YAML file for that matter. YAML is a markup language, even though the acronym is yet another markup language. You have to be very careful of your spacing and your format. So it's very critical that you're very careful in that file. I want to see, so my IP address here is so I'm going to vi docker compose.yaml. The community needs to be able to access both my LDAP server, which is STPIN1, and my Mongo server, which I told it was STPIN2. Which is 17 app. Numpad does not always work in these putty shells. Now I already know that, so I know that these two items need to be accessed by multiple components. So I'm going to go ahead and add it to my other ones. Proxy. The auth component.
Oh, sorry, you typed 20. It's not 200. The IP address of STP2.
Thank you. Otherwise, we'd be doing it again. It's always handy to have somebody looking over your shoulder. And so that my copy and paste will be correct. That actually looks off. The rule is that extra host usually lines up straight up under networks, and then the dashes are 2 spaces in. And we're not going to have time to get to troubleshoot everything here, but I wanted to get the idea of what you do. And catalog. Now I'm adding for both my LDAP and my MongoDB server. The LDAP is required by community. Everything else requires MongoDB. And then we will Restart and hope I didn't make any typos. And I didn't because it's starting up. If you make a typo in there, if things aren't spaced correctly, this Docker Compose up-d will fail and tell you why. Then we'll see we started, and we will do our Docker Compose logs-f community. And hopefully this time we won't see that MongoDB error. But this is exactly how I would go about looking, right? We see our we just see all our standard prints that we used to get from sametime.log plus a few others. And if I needed to add debugging, we'll do that in just a second because I do want to show that real quickly. We've actually made it fairly easy because we created a way to add debugging with a couple of simple commands. If you're following along and you see this server has wrong net address ignoring, you can ignore that print. In Docker creates its own networks underneath the covers. Things don't always line up the way you expect them to, so that is just a informational print. In older days with 11.6 and Domino, that might have been a very key print to know why things weren't connecting up. It's not important in a Docker world. Okay, so we're going to ignore this error for the moment. I'll debug it later. It still says no route to host, which is different than host unknown, but I'll deal with that in a minute. Control C to get out of the port. Yeah, I didn't expect this particular error. That's actually surprising to me, but we'll go on. To add debugging, we have an environment file called debug.env that is specific to community. So if I needed to add debugging to community, I would add that file to my Docker compose.yaml as an extra environment variable file. So I'd again VI this, and here where it says environment file custom.env, I would hit enter, insert, hit enter, two spaces.
Incidentally, somebody in the Q&A pointed out that there's one of the IP addresses there is still 20 instead of 200.
Thank you. You just solved my problem. You get 5 points. So we'll do this, but so I've added the debug.env. Now, the nice thing about the debug.env, if we were to look at it, is it gives you a clue for those, again, that are familiar with community from before about how we might add in additional parameters. Let's say I needed to trace my LDAP connection, and I needed to add specifically a parameter I'm familiar with, which is under the debug section, LDAP underscore trace underscore all equals 1. Well, I can do that by following this format. STI means same time INI, 2 underbars, you type in the section. In our case, we want debug, and this is not case sensitive. 2 underbars would then be the parameter name. And I am having them add this one by default to this file because most often in a community environment, we have one of 2 problems. Either we can't connect to Mongo, as you saw, or I'm having trouble with my LDAP authentication. So I'm having this in fix pack 1. One of the improvements is adding this one line to this file. But so now when I start up, so you do Docker compose down. But now when I start up, I will have added community tracing to my community component. So for those of you that have existing community parameters that you've manually added to Sametime.ini, like a community ID or specific LDAP tuning, or, well, you know, there's a lot of variations out there. The way you add those is similar to how you would have added them to that debug.env, but you can add them either to a custom env file that you create on your own, or you can add them directly to custom.env just by following that scheme that I just showed. All of that is documented in the slides that I was starting to present, how you would add LTPA tokens, how you would add LDAP, secure LDAP, how you might add secure connections to the MUX, all those types of things. I've got them documented. They're in the slideware. The public documentation is still in the process of being updated with some of them, but they all follow that type of pattern. So now that I've added debug here, if we do our Docker compose logs-f community, you'll see there's a whole lot more stuff here. And sometimes there's so much stuff it's hard to find what you want. So I might decide to look. Well, here's your one thing here is I'm trying to connect to STPN 1389 and can't connect to LDAP server. That LDAP server is probably down. But there's prints like that you might look for. If I wanted to verify that my chat logging, my Mongo got connected, you can type in something like, you wouldn't do a -f, but you can pipe that through grep -i in case it's case, and type the word Mongo, and then you can see here that we got connected to Mongo. So thank you for the hint that I had my IP address wrong. You solved that problem. We're not going to worry about connecting to LDAP. I'm sure that that server is down, and and we're running. I think we're starting to run low on time. But that's how you would debug community. That's how you would check community for its running, and that's how you would get some information from the logs. There's a lot more things you can do. There's a lot of power in what you can do here with the container. If I wanted to get to the same, you know, the community still has a Sametime INI file, a community config.txt XML file for the community config where the LDAP information is stored, has a user info XML, has all of those things. And there's ways to get to those files, copy them locally so you can check and or change settings as needed. Keep in mind that if you change something within the running container and you don't save it externally, it gets lost on restart. So, you know, I've dove into community debug. If I wanted to check my video bridge, the commands are similar. The JVB is what we call the video bridge. You would get logs from it if you were trying to diagnose a problem. The most common thing is getting your public IP address. So if I wanted to find out what was discovered through stun, I would grep for the word discovered. And this tells me that my public address for this particular machine is this, and that is where my media streams would be directed. That's also most likely, and in this particular case is, the same IP address that people would be using from the public to hit chat.company.com if that was my host name. So that's a way to tell real quickly that JVB is connecting to stun, getting an IP address back, and what that IP address is. Since that is the most common problem when it comes to media streams not working, is not getting the address you expect. You've told people to use meetings.company.com. It comes to a load balancer, which might be a different host name or a different IP address that routes to the back end. But the media streams will always come back to this public address as discovered from stun. That might not be the same address. So that's something to check. I think, I mean, there's a lot more I can cover. I do know that I'm out of time as far as our official time. I'm happy to answer questions. Let me get that presentation back up in front of me in case there are questions that we have.
Yes, Tony, we have several questions, but we're running out of time. So what we usually do is that either me or Jesse will collect the question, send it to you offline. You will answer to us, and we publish the Q&A on our website. So if you agree, this is what we're gonna do, because I guess Jesse correct me, but I guess that we have to close now.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so we will, because there are a lot of good questions in here. We'll get these answered and we will post these on the site alongside the presentation itself. You can look for that at openntf.org/webinars. And we'll also post the Q&A will come in the form of a blog post on there. So keep an eye out for that. There is definitely some good stuff in here.
Okay, well, I thank everybody. I apologize for the brief interruption, and I hope that today's session was valuable to you. I really wanted to show that it is very simple to deploy a Sametime environment on Docker. We've had some questions on it. If you're not familiar with Docker, it certainly seems, kind of like it ought to be complicated, but it really isn't. It was half a dozen commands as followed directly from our documentation. I didn't do anything different. And then, of course, making sure your IP addresses are correct and how you might override them if you need to. I'm sure I know there's more questions. I'm happy to answer them through the forum as stated, and we'll get that out to you. So I thank you for attending.
Thank you, Tony. And I think that we can close the meeting now. See you in a month on the next webinar, whose topic yet has to be decided, but there will be a webinar in August. Bye, all.